I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce, and this is The Radical Center, a recording project I began in 2022 as a way to describe and discuss the social and ideological currents that are rapidly altering our culture. In a time when political polarization seems to be the norm, I'm seeking to understand rather than react. I'm grateful to all the thoughtful men and women who share their stories and insights with me in this conversation series. If you would like to contribute to this project financially, there are links in the description. Thank you, and thank you all for listening and being part of this exploration. Today I'm speaking with Rick McCarthy, and Rick, you and I spoke about a year and a half ago, and we talked about an episode in your life where you were dealing with the California Association for Marriage and Family Counseling. And there was this really contentious issue. They were really pushing gender affirming care, and you were trying to question that, push back a little bit, calling out some of the blatant malpractice in their writings and their policies for therapists. And it was a really good conversation. I really enjoyed speaking with you about that and about other things that we branched off into as we were speaking. I'm so happy to speak with you again. And the reason I wanted to speak with you is that you've published a new book, and it's called Restoring Marriage and Families, A Guide and Tools in Order to Form a More Perfect Union. There it is. Yes. And in just the discussion that you and I had and the little that I've come to know about you, I thought this would be a great thing for you to specifically be talking about with your experience in working with families, and also just the sort of, I guess, would you call your stance conservative, your political stance? You seem to have
Yes.
like a very balanced perspective on relationship specifically.
Well, part of it's unavoidable because it's you get whatever comes through the door, so you get that mix of society. I spent most of my practice up in LA County, and so that definitely leaned left.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm in Southern Orange County, which is about in the middle, little to the right probably. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but you get everything. But it's interesting that as much as political beliefs differ, there's you alluded to it earlier. There's a human quality that longs for connection, that has some idea that they're in many, and sadly in many cases, are missing something, but they're not sure what that is. They're not sure what the formula is, and the things that as you mentioned about your interview with Darlene, things that we took for granted that the culture was teaching, schools were teaching, families were teaching, churches were teaching. It was pretty much the same across the board. And so the formula was out there for everyone to utilize. And all the data shows that in terms of health, happiness, stability in families and marriages and all that. And now it's almost obliterated completely. And so, people are struggling, relationships are struggling, marriage is down, birth rates down, people living by themselves is up, loneliness is up.
Yeah.
So they're searching, but they don't know what to do because there's part of our culture, unfortunately, that's encouraging the destruction of that design or formula to marriages and families. And so it's been devastating over the last 30, 40 years.
Yeah, I remember when we spoke last time, you mentioned the sex education that you got when you were studying to become a counselor, and then when you were teaching the kinds of curriculum that was available and that you were working through, and how very different that is from what we're seeing today.
Completely.
And one of the things that I sort of keep circling back to in this series of dialogues over the last couple of years that I've been having as we look at what's shifting in our culture, I keep kind of wondering what are we pinning our concept of relationship and sexual ethics on? Because it seems like we used to be founded in, like you said, this kind of formula that had not changed very much for a very long time. And these sorts of maybe, maybe Judeo-Christian, just religious foundations that guided how we thought of people coming together to form families, what sexual relationships should look like in a moral and ethical sort of frame. And now, over the last couple of decades, we've seen a real shift towards anything goes as long as you have consent. And we are right now, I mean, in my program that I studied in just a couple of years ago, there was promotion of things like polyamory and ethical non-monogamy over what they called cis heteronormativity, which was not just one of the options, but it was actually the worst option if you talk to the professor in the course. This was the thing that we need to stop centering. We want to
Right.
stop centering cis heteronormativity and promote everything else. So that's just such a dramatic shift, and it just seems like the people who really lose are people who value true intimate connection,
Hmm.
lifelong love and support and family and children. And so when you talk about restoring relationships, that's that's a very big interest of mine, and I'm curious
Oh, sure.
what your conceptualization is.
It One way to look at it, when you think about this, the sexual revolution, it essentially contributed to destroying everything that we knew or appreciated or respected about the the sacred sexual relationship between a man and woman in marriage that's almost completely obliterated. So our society now is lost. We're not even it's like what happens sometimes when I work with couples. I stop them and I go, I get a sense you guys aren't even talking about the same thing. You're fighting, but let's see if we can talk at least about the same subject. They're so far off. We're not even talking about sex anymore. The We've gone so far off the perversion detour, and you think of they used to use the word perversions in sex, human sexuality texts and sex therapy, because they were talking about that normative, okay, here's what a healthy sex relationship looks like. And anything that diverts from that or perverts from that is usually not this. It's something else, and oftentimes dysfunctional, unhealthy, amoral, whatever you want to label it. But it's if you think about what the ideal is, if you had an ideal sexual relationship, you're talking about a man who is a man and has all the healthy masculine qualities that he was born with and was taught and learned to master all the negative sides of his innate biology. And then the same thing for a woman. And, ideally, if you get them, they grow up in a relatively decent family background, intact biological nuclear family, and they find each other and have a pretty good, healthy dating history where there's a gradual learning of each other, holding off on the sex because I mean, even even clients that I work with that have no religious background whatsoever, they know that, if I have sex with this guy on the first date, that usually will the relationship's not going to last very long. They don't
Mm.
know why that is, but they know that is. And so But if back to this couple, they're healthy, they're mature, they're the best of what a man is and what a female is. They get married, which is not by design. It's not a selfish act. It's a community act. It's a societal act. That's why we have people, witnesses
Hmm.
there. It's a religious act. And there's all kinds of purpose to it other than I want someone in my life to meet all my needs,
Hmm.
which is narcissistic and selfish. And so you have this couple, and if a person can imagine, especially in today's society, they meet on their honeymoon, they haven't had sex yet.
Hmm.
And so they are now on a learning curve to connect on the most intimate way that a man and woman can connect on that physical, spiritual level and psychological level, and learn about each other through the process. This is how I think, feel. This is what I like, dislike, and so they grow sexually as that unique couple. Um, it's gosh, I think one of my early clients, um, and a mistake I made therapeutically, I oftentimes thought naively in the beginning that let's put all our cards on the table, let's not keep any secrets from each other. And I had this couple that came in for premarital counseling, and this was back in the early 80s, and where the average male probably had, if they were in their mid 20s, maybe 5, 6 sexual partners over the course of their dating history on average. And he was he was kind of concerned about her history, his fiance. And he says she doesn't really like to talk about it. So I kind of convinced him that it would be therapeutic and informative to talk about it. And so he started, and he talked a little bit about his dating history and that he had sex with, I think it was about six girls or women. And I got her reaction, and she wasn't disturbed at all or didn't have many questions at all. And then I said, "Okay, how about you?" And she sat there, and then she started doing this with her
Mm.
fingers, and then she goes, "I think about 50."
Mm.
And the look on his face, I could still remember it after all these years. And then, of course, that's when I realized, oops, now what am I going to do with this? And I tried to repair as much as I could because he was just in shock.
Yeah.
And they came back the next week, and I think that was the last session I saw them, because he said, I can't do this. I think about it all the time. And he said, I was walking down the street and I saw a school bus go by, and I thought, she could fit all those guys
Oh
that she
gosh.
had sex with on that school bus.
Yeah.
So he couldn't get past that. She will not, I will not be able to develop a unique soul sexual relationship with this partner, because I won't be able to get past the thought, is she thinking of somebody else? Am I as good as this person? All the questions that normally would come. So you hear the term now is body count, that
Hmm. Hmm.
people are into. And I keep trying to help people understand that it's not like playing tennis, that if you can get really good at tennis and play anybody. And if you've had, you know, 200 tennis partners over your tennis career, boy, that's good. You're a good tennis player. It doesn't work that way with sex,
Hmm. Hmm.
because there's as sex as with love, there's an important component of vulnerability. And to share that level of vulnerability with someone that um, does not, uh, I guess, value
Mhm.
that individual connection with this one other person. That's a tough hill to climb for a lot of people. And
Mhm.
so, the bottom line is that there are so few people now. Most of them are elderly because they grew up in a culture that encouraged that type of relationship that, we especially for men, when I was growing up, the idea was, well, yeah, I want sex, but I'm not going to get any until I get married. And so I've got to figure out how am I going to work this? How am I going to be the best man I can be so I can find the best woman and spend the rest of my life and yada yada yada. And so that's all gone. And
Mhm.
so what most of the population is doing now is not sex, by design. And as you probably have found, they are suffering greatly for it. The depression, the anxiety that goes with that, the loneliness. Um,
Mhm.
there's nothing like, and lonely people say this all the time, that it's not so much when I'm alone in a room, it's when I'm with other people
Mhm.
and there's no connection. I'm not known by anybody or understood by anybody, and I don't know anybody. Uh,
Mhm.
and that's sad. It's um, I don't know if you've gotten this sometimes where I'll try to assess the level of connection that a client has. And this is after sometimes just seeing him for a month or two. And I'll say, out of everybody you've ever known in your life, who would you say knows you the best? And it's so sad when they say, that would be you. Uh,
Oh.
and I that is so painful to get through, to realize that no one knows them, and they've made it. And these are people in their 40s and 50s, and
Mhm.
but we've got generations of people going through now. And if you look, you've seen the stats. Um, I've just heard on the news, which is interesting. It's picking up for some reason. They're talking about birth rate. We've been below the replacement birth rate for a couple of decades now. We're dying as a society, literally, and also the marriage rate is down, loneliness is up, and so it's and then as I mentioned, one of the reasons why I wrote this book is because I knew enough of history that the cornerstone of all major uh, decent, civilizations over the course of history, the cornerstone has always been marriage and the family. That they otherwise you have tribes of some sort that come and go. There's been thousands and thousands of those. We're
Mhm.
talking about large societies. Um, and then and then you look historically, as the family, as the moral fabric breaks down and the family breaks down, the country is right behind it.
Yeah, when you're talking about the ideal couple, as you're giving the description of this ideal of people who are healthy and fit in their body, a man who's masculine, a woman who's feminine, coming together with genuine curiosity and attraction and developing a relationship culminating in marriage and then developing a sexual relationship that it's it a couple of things occurred to me. One is that in any kind of modern educational setting, if you were to say that, which sounds like common sense, kind of this human
Yes.
biological normative sort of process that's been going on forever with human beings, this that right now that would sound like homophobia, transphobia, cis heteronormativity. It would be like this. That would be the thing you couldn't describe that as normal or desirable right now. And also, it sounds to me, even somebody who, and I'm Gen X, so I'm not. I have a little bit more of that grounding in traditional sort of the patterns and the formula, as you called it.
Right.
But it sounds like a distant ideal that probably doesn't happen very often anymore. When you have
Sadly,
people
yes.
who, you recount that story of your clients with the woman with the high number of sexual partners in her past and how it was hard for her partner to get past that. And I can totally imagine that that would be the case. I can actually imagine that it would be the case either direction, that a woman hearing
Yes.
that her partner has had a really promiscuous sexual history would be taken aback by that. And I would even add pornography into the equation. A man who's a porn user, his wife or his girlfriend might look at that and knowing that and realize there's no way I can be special for him when he can
No.
search up anybody in any act all the time and looks at that. And then he comes to bed with me and my human imperfection when
Mhm.
he's got access to, anything that he could want to look at. Who am I? How could I possibly be special? So
Mhm.
thinking about that ideal and how far we are from that, both ideologically and realistically, it is very sad. It's like we've taken the most, as you I think rightly described it, the most intimate act, the act of most closeness that two people can achieve, and we've made it vulgar and cheap and hedonistic and
Well, I'm glad you mentioned
plentiful.
that. It's because someone, the average person in today's culture would say, yeah, it's a close connection. We're sharing something, but not really, because I knew from um, one of my first internships was by I'm not sure where are you from, Los Angeles or
I'm from Texas originally, and I live
oh,
in
Texas.
Washington State. Yeah.
Oh, you're in Washington. Okay.
Mhm.
It was by the Los Angeles airport, which and back then was very seedy around the area. And so we would get sex offenders, they're usually court-ordered sex offenders or prostitutes in as clients,
Mhm.
and which was an education. But I learned from them, the prostitutes, that they're having lots of sex, but it's not, they're completely detached from it.
Mhm.
There's no emotional bond whatsoever, which enables them to repeat that action over and over with strangers. Whereas if if a if a prostitute had sex with a stranger and it was a bad experience, they sadly, for all kinds of reasons, could fairly well brush it off. But if you had an individual who only had sex with their spouse and had sex with a stranger unwanted and it was a
Mhm.
bad experience, then they're heavily traumatized
Mhm.
because they don't have that level of defense against protect
Mhm.
from contact like that. And so it's yeah, there's
I would wonder
they
if the
we're talking
prostitute
about
doesn't just have a spread out version of the trauma, like it's the same trauma just being played out on a broad scale. I would wonder that.
oh yes, it's gosh, I don't know. I mean I want to
Sorry to derail you.
trying to set I'm
Yeah, yeah.
censoring some of my clients
Oh,
because some of them were way over the top, but I remember one. I always I'm sure you remember certain clients as well. One was she was a sex worker in the strawberry fields. She was hired by someone, and there would be like a shack off the fields that at the end of the day, the workers would go to the shack, sometimes dozens, in an afternoon, evening, and that
Wow.
would just be her. And she did that for, gosh, I think it was like 12, 13 years. And so
Wow.
you can
Oh
imagine
my gosh.
the depth of injury
Yeah.
for someone like that. And even and you it's phenomenal when you see it, because you would think the person would be in a padded room or cell somewhere, that they wouldn't be able to function, but the defenses, they can build the defenses to an extent where unless she started talking about it, you wouldn't know
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
that had happened to her. But but again, it's sad. The general public has no idea that they aren't experiencing anything close to the way sex was designed, which
Mm-hmm.
is unbelievably wonderful, beautiful, indescribable at times. That I think I even wrote it in my book. At best, most couples are engaged in some form of mutual masturbation.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best they can do. That this is what I need. This is what rings my bell or turns me on. Fetishes all over the place, toys, you know, uh, things outside the couple. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so otherwise they don't get turned on, in other
Mm-hmm.
words. And but it's sad to have seen that again over the almost 50 years I've been doing this. I rarely see a couple that have, lived by the ideal formula,
Mm-hmm.
and you can see them. And sadly, most of them have been married they're elderly, but you can see that connection. It is so deep and so rich, even though they got wrinkles all over them and everything's sagging. They don't see that at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's wonderful to witness.
I wonder if you could speak to the relationship between loneliness and the hedonistic sensation seeking kind of sexual discourse that we have now. I like how you described it as mutual masturbation, and that does seem like what we see. It's like uh, this kind of hookup culture, this
Mhm.
kink positive. I mean,
Oh
this
yeah.
was a thing that I spoke with a young therapist trainee a couple of years ago who was a woman who was, gosh, this is going to get explicit, so we might get we get like a strike on YouTube, but
We'll
that's
have to do
okay.
an R rating on
Yeah,
this
yeah.
video.
She was in a forum for a particular kind of kink, and maybe I should
Yeah.
just not say it and that'll help. But it was a kind of kink that she said had been introduced to her by a man that she had been sexually involved with. There wasn't a boyfriend, it was just a man, one of the men that she was sexually involved with, like a friend with benefits or something, that she didn't really like this kink. So she went into a forum to seek out people to do this with because she wanted to be able to get past that aversion so she could be more kink positive and sex positive for her clients because this is what she wanted to be able to do. She was like an LGBTQ and and kink focused therapy trainee. That was the kind of work she wanted to do. So the idea of going in and seeking out strangers to commit an act of an unusual act that wouldn't be a quote unquote natural act in order to get past an aversion that she felt. And so she targeted the aversion as the problem. And I've
Right.
seen this with like sexology. The sexologists, you read their work and it's it's like the problem isn't the sex or the kink or polyamory or whatever, it's your shame about it. And so if you don't like it, that's because you've internalized this cis heteronormativity, and it's this shame thing that's holding you back. So it's not the porn, it's not the kink, it's your messed up, uh, you know, religious perspective that you need to work to overcome. And that's a real strong thread going through our culture right now.
Oh, completely through the culture. They're not selling health and wellness anymore. They're selling the disease
Mm.
and promoting it and normalizing it. So the at the beginning of the sexual revolution, there was, especially with gender. Um, I don't know if you remember, people like John Gray who came out and, women are
Mm.
flowers, men,
Mm.
they we were getting to the point, and I thought, okay, this is good. We have some good studies. We're with oftentimes humor looking at the differences between men and women, and how can we, with better understanding, help them understand each other better, which is always a good thing, and so that they can connect at a deeper level and appreciate those differences. And then in the 90s, that just went out the window. It just, no, we think women are the same as men. And we're going to stick with that. And so yeah, feminism, again, that's the all the movements that got co-opted, unfortunately, by the uh, mainly Marxist ideology. It just wiped out our society, our belief systems. Um, it's with the uh, in back to gender again. Uh, Even still, I used to bring this up with my classes all the time, but with my clients sometimes, that someone, they'll be arguing about, no, what do you mean? Yes, women look at sex just like men do. And I would always use this example that if you have I'd ask usually the females in the class, okay, let's say you're walking down the street and a car pulls up with four drunk guys, cat calling you, come on in, babe, for a good time. How many of you would get into that car? And usually zero would raise their hands. And then I would look at the guys and I go, okay, guys, car pulls up, three girls, they're yelling at you to get in the car for a good time. How many would get in the car? Three-quarters of the class would raise their hand. And of course, the females would usually throw epitaphs at epithets at the guys, pigs and misogynists and all that. And so I said, there's a huge difference, and it's not just today's culture. If you go back in evolutionary psychology, there's reasons why we're different, but we're talking base masculinity and femininity, which is good to know and understand, but that we've ideally evolved over the years, and as I mentioned before, we want to be the best of men and the best of women, um, because and one thing I learned even back in school is that regarding dating, we usually the way it works out, we get what we deserve, or people will find each other with similar levels of psychological issues. So if you have an alcoholic or an addict, they're going to somehow find a codependent, to be
Mhm.
attracted to, and vice versa. Or if someone has had a very traumatic past, or is very injured, I suppose, and afraid of being hurt again, sadly, they're going to be attracted to someone that's going to hurt them. And obviously, they manipulate them in the beginning and lie to them.
Mhm.
But it's so that goes on constantly. And so, yes, if when I get somebody that comes in and dating, like I put in my book, I just saw her a few years ago, but she had been online dating well over 100 dates over the last year. And so she just figured it was a numbers game. You just keep going, and then
Mm,
finally you'll find the right one. Well, as you probably know, the formula is not finding the right one, it's being the right one,
mhm,
and then you will find it'll be hard not to find the healthy right one once you sufficiently heal and get rid of as much baggage as you can.
mhm,
Otherwise, you will bring that in to
mhm,
any relationship, and um, so
mhm.
it's yeah. There is a design, there is a formula. It's not like we don't know how it's supposed to work. It's just that our culture has distorted the whole process of men, women, relationships, marriage. Um, the Yeah, they even included it in my book. I don't know if you heard, in California, they passed a proposition last year that gets rid of all language in the California Constitution regarding traditional marriage, um,
Wow.
and which is a
Hmm.
disaster in and of itself. But as a lot of conservative lawyers and politicians were writing, people need to understand what's going to happen. It's not just that, well, we can't be prejudiced against all these alternatives. They're eventually going to ban uh, normal marriage or traditional marriage,
Mhm.
as and so that's the direction that they're going in. And of course, sadly, that was passed. So
That's incredible.
it is, and of course that's California.
Well, it's such a
Leader.
short period of time. Was it 2008, I think, or nine? There was this wave of discussion over whether same-sex unions could be considered marriage, whether we could have same-sex marriage. And it seemed to me at the time that if two people who are same-sex attracted loved each other and wanted to form a traditional model marriage just with same-sex partners, I I honestly didn't see anything really wrong with that. I've come to see that a little bit differently. In terms of forcing people to recognize something like that as marriage, when marriage already had a definition and was more of a religious recognition, a spiritual union, versus maybe having something like a civil union to allow people to um, proclaim this individual as their loving partner that will be with them for the purposes of all legal functions. I see that. I've come to see it a little bit differently. I would support, if I could go back in time, I would probably support civil union and not be as much in support of gay marriage per se. But
Absolutely, sure.
also I still don't see that necessarily going opening up the idea of marriage to same-sex couples had to become the slippery slope that everybody said, that many people on the right said it would become, and that we have seen. Like we've
Right.
seen this go from, okay, so we can define what marriage is, but we're going to open that up so that people who love each other who are same-sex attracted can also engage in this in an institutionally recognized manner, all the way to now we
Yeah.
look askance at traditional marriage and we consider that sort of like some patriarchal white supremacist cis heteronormative. Like, how did we get here so quickly? How did that
Yeah,
happen?
what could have gone wrong?
Yeah.
Yes, I remember those discussions and arguments back then, that, are you just being paranoid? How does it hurt you at all as a person that I want to marry Bob or whatever?
Mhm, mhm,
And if a person wasn't grounded in that basic formula, and as you alluded to, saw it as sacred, yeah, you can do whatever you want. It's America, as long as it doesn't harm me. But this is this is a sacred institution and you want to change it. It's
Mm-hmm.
and so yes, I remember the slippery slope and what could go wrong. And then of course
Mm-hmm.
here we are where now we're moving towards that point where it is, normative types of relationships are seen as bigoted, or oppressive to
Mm-hmm.
everybody else. And so it's yeah, we've come a long way, and of course in the wrong direction.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the reasons why, as I started to think about writing this book and updating the stats, I didn't even realize how bad it was until I started getting into the writing of each section of, where is parenting right now? Where dating, boy, that's a mess. Marriage, conflict resolution, of course, the whole gender thing, um, retirement, divorce, everything, all the indicators, all of them have gone down in terms of health, wellness, happiness. I mean, if you look at all the data from, and of course, one of the things that's a constant, even today, the healthiest, happiest, wealthiest, uh, mentally sound individuals are married. And the opposite is true for everything else,
Mm-hmm.
in a traditional marriage, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, even with, I remember teaching about cohabitation back in the 80s when they came up with some pretty good studies that show that if you live with your partner before you get married, you go from roughly, back then it was about a 50% chance of getting divorced to a 75% chance of getting divorced.
Wow.
And I would walk the students through because they were all shocked. I'd usually see it, take a show of hands. How many of you think it would be a logical thing to kind of test drive the car before you get married? And usually at least three-quarters of the class would raise their hand that, yeah, I'm going to live with someone first just to make sure. And so they would be shocked, and I would walk them through as to why is that?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that still true today? That I think the stats is a 36% greater chance of divorce if you live with your spouse first.
Oh my gosh.
And so there's a lot of moving parts there. Generally speaking, again, the more you move away from the design, the original design of marriage and dating as well, then divorce rate goes up. The more you move away from convention, I suppose, and tradition.
Mm-hmm. I would wonder if a factor in that would be that it's probably pretty rare right now that people do avoid cohabitation before marriage in our American culture, I would
It's
imagine.
about the pretty close to 60% are going to live with their spouse
Okay.
before they get married. Yeah.
And that's lower than I would have thought. I would have imagined it was even higher than that. And so I wonder
I agree.
if
Yeah.
people who choose not to do that are already coming into the relationship with a greater level of understanding and commitment of what they're getting into, like a greater reverence for what they're about to embark upon.
If they live with each other
If
first.
they don't,
Oh, if they
if the
don't,
people who
yes,
are choosing not to, I mean, so the attitude that you've been taught about marriage or that you have about marriage, it seems like if you're somebody who's going to be that intentional about it, that you might place greater value on this relationship in this form and maybe take it more
absolutely.
seriously.
Yeah, it's self-fulfilling in that way. Um, you, it's I oftentimes use the skydiving analogy that you can learn about, read about skydiving all the time, but until you let go of that plane, you will never know what it's like.
Mhm.
And so you can't test drive commitment.
Mhm.
You're either committed or you're
Wow, that's a great, yes, that's really a
and there
profoundly
is
good
an
statement.
inherent belief system, yes, going into living with the person. Obviously, there's a logic there that yeah, I want to test drive. I want to make sure that she's perfect and there's not going to be any problems or, in the future, especially. And
Mhm.
and what I see is what I got.
Mhm.
Well, that never happens. And so that's why in the vows, to some degree, it is for better and worse, not if there's going to be worse, when there is worse, because
Yeah.
there's going to be problems, conflicts. And so the disillusion that is experienced if you live with the person and then find that usually very quickly that, oh my gosh, I didn't bargain for this. And
Mhm.
so obviously I wasn't paying close enough attention when we were living with each
Mhm.
other.
Mhm.
But one dynamic too, even if you don't live with the person, when I work with couples, for premarital counseling, I usually have them do sort of a visualization or visual imagery of what it would be like being a wife and husband, because you guys know what it's like being a boyfriend girlfriend. What? Because the first question I'll ask them is, do you think anything will change once you get married? Nah.
Mhm.
Especially if they're live with each other. We've lived with each other for 3 years. No, it's going to be the same. And I said, well, probably not. And because you still look at each other uh, on probation in a way,
Mhm.
and your boyfriend girlfriend. What if anything? And I walk them through. Okay, you're a husband. How does that feel? Uh, you're looking at her now, and she's your wife. Do you see her any different? Expectations change, and especially if you have some idea of their family of origin, um, they feel different. Uh,
Mhm.
and so, and what happens too? A big part of why cohabitation doesn't work, if you know you're on probation, let's say even at work, aren't you going to act differently, work differently, if you know that if I mess up one more time, I'm out of here?
Mhm.
Um, as opposed to I've got tenure at this school and I'd have to kill somebody for
Mhm.
them to kick me out.
Yeah.
Uh, that you will act differently. And so, paradoxically, what happens, the couple gets married, they look at each other and they think, oh, wow, she married me and she doesn't even know this, and this, because I could not, would not show this to her
Mhm.
because she would have left me. And I hear that all the time. Why didn't you tell me that? Uh, you were in prison or you were raped multiple times. Well, because I thought you would leave me. Yeah.
Mhm.
And now we're married. And so
Mhm.
those are big situations, but couples find that all the time. So rather than that connection continuing to come in and the intimacy, the defenses go up
Mhm.
that, oh, I think I may have made a mistake, and I'm sure they did because they don't know about this, and this. So
Mhm.
I have to kind of back up a bit emotionally.
Mhm.
And of course, the other one picks that up, and then that's going to raise their defenses.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's rather than a convergence after marriage, you have a instant divergence that happens on an
Mhm.
unconscious level
Wow.
at first, to the point where, as most couples, that now we're fighting about stupid little things. What's that all about? Why are we angry at each other? I don't know. It's and so they're just confused.
Mhm. Well, it's interesting. I was we had this conversation for the Solid Ground live stream the other day, and you mentioned in the beginning of this conversation the interview that I had with Darlene Lev, a professor who's has a really uh, I really appreciate her perspective. She's describes herself as an ex-feminist, talks about how some of the ways that she felt encouraged by society as a young woman over her lifetime, she's looked back and seen that those actually did not serve her well and have resulted in a feeling of loneliness and disconnection, a missed opportunity for marriage and family because she was prioritizing other things that she felt were very much coming in, through the culture and these pro sex positive, sort of women can be like men messages that she was receiving. And I was saying at the end of that conversation, I said, the internet is kind of like Yelp in a way. It's like the only time you see the comments are the people who have the rare, really great experience, and then a whole bunch of people who had a terrible experience. So it's
Right.
kind of like reviews. So if you spend a lot of time reading internet discourse on relationships, you see some really bitter and sad people. And I noticed this in a couple of years ago. I guess it was a year and a half ago. My husband got sort of this swarm of angry radical feminists that were targeting his YouTube channel, and you'd see these comments, this really angry side of women, the way that this was manifesting, not in all women, of course, but in a group of women. And now with the Darlene Lev interview, I saw a similar kind of swarm of angry men and the bitterness that you see in
Yes.
both sides. And it's interesting. There's so much finger pointing. You've got the the narratives that you'll hear from some women, which will be really man bashing, man hating. You hear the thing about toxic masculinity and the patriarchy and rape culture, et cetera, et cetera. And then from men, you hear this really strong anti-feminist, women ruined everything. We're going our own way. We can no longer rely on women. And I think I'm interested in your perspective as a couples therapist, as a marriage and family therapist, because you must be seeing how this manifests differently for men than women, but how I'm not sure that the finger pointing is really very helpful. When
No,
we
because we
even when we
we've
think about
all
feminism, there
right.
that's a real hot button for a lot of men is to be very anti-feminist. And I have a sense that we're not necessarily even agreeing on what we're talking about when we're talking about
Yes.
feminism. So,
Yeah, we're just looking at half the picture. Bottom line, we've all been lied to,
mhm,
and sadly, the culture, every aspect of the culture, and even religious churches have, and education, of course, have all drank the Kool-Aid, and so it's people are bitter, angry, lonely, lost, completely lost. That's as I say that word. Uh, if I had plotted on a graph every time I heard the word lost come out of a client's mouth, say over the last 40 years, it would just be this
oh
huge
wow.
uptick. It's and I right when they say that, they don't even have to fill in the blanks. I know exactly where they are, and just they've been going down this road, and it feels bad, it feels lonely, it doesn't feel right. They don't even have a sense of their own identity, getting back to child development, because it's when you look back at the design of a family, it starts with the marriage.
Mhm,
And so ideally, if you have this couple, the man is the best of men and she's the best of women, and they love each other, and they're now one, which is a beautiful, mystery in a way. And then you have these little kids looking up at these people, and we all know that modeling is the most powerful form of learning as we go through development. And they will feel the love, they'll feel the strength, the boys will start to say, okay, that's where I'm going. I'm
mhm,
going to be a man, and that's what a man is like, and vice versa for a woman. And that's how a man treats a woman. And
mhm,
so it's all there. You have this microcosm of society, And ideally, if everything goes well and everybody's healthy and sane, the children leave home and duplicate and ideally sometimes makes improvements on where they came from. And then so therefore you will have a rich, healthy, thriving society. And
Mhm.
everybody's happy and the communities enjoy the community. You know, they enjoy each other, they enjoy their neighbors because we're all relatively decent, sane, healthy people.
Mhm.
Whereas now, most people have a sense of how chaotic and distorted and lost our culture is. And even
Mhm.
though we're told that no, 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 this is good, this is healthy. You want this, like you said, you
Mhm.
want painful sex. That's a step above where, average sex. And um, I think back about, teaching, human sexuality on the undergraduate level. Um, I would, have them, the class do a quick survey on who has the best sex. And it was usually a combination, somewhere between couples that have dated each other for about a year and very newly married couples. And then it's downhill from there. And especially when I would ask them, okay, how about a couple in their mid 40s, which is usually about where their parents were at the time. And, I'd always get this, ew. No, I don't think so. I'm probably near celibacy by then,
Mhm.
which is terrible. And so they again would be confused when I would say, I have learned, I knew, but I've learned since I've been in this practice and especially doing sex therapy, that the couples that have the best sex out of anybody are couples that have been married for a long time. And,
Mhm.
I've again remembering couples, especially I remember this one that were in their mid 60s. They weren't coming in for their marriage. They had lost a child, and so they were grieving. But their relationship, their sexual relation, everything about their relationship was fantastic.
Mhm.
And so that ideally should be our guide, couples like that, most people even back, this is back in the 80s, looked at that, oh no, God, a couple in their 60s, forget about it. That's my grandparents.
Mhm.
I don't want to even imagine that,
Well,
that they would be connected at that rich of a level. Because
uh,
if you think about the formula, if love is based on understanding and learning, and you can't love someone therefore when you meet them because you don't know them, and understanding takes a long time, that sex is also part of that. So you can't, by design, you cannot have really, by design, positive good sex initially. You can have something that kind of looks like it, but if you were to talk to couples that have an excellent marriage and excellent sex life, and they're still, healthy in their 60s, most people would be amazed and shocked. Uh,
mhm.
they would, it'd be like talking to aliens almost. That it's so different than what our culture holds up now as ideal.
Mhm. Mhm. And when you speak about children looking at the relationships of their parents and the adults in their lives, I, I, I was thinking about how now the stats on pornography exposure for kids is that they a lot of times have already seen porn by the time they're 8 or 9, and
Yes.
certainly most kids by age 10.
Yes.
And to me, we know when we speak about internet porn, we're not talking about just some relatively innocent photos of nude people. We're talking
No.
about really graphic stuff. Um, and a lot of times violent, a lot of times just some pretty extreme behavior. That really seems like a form of sexual abuse to expose
Yes.
children to that. It seems like it should be criminal to have children be able to access such
Well, it used to
content.
be.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, if you had a stranger give
yeah.
an 8-year-old a book on, same
Yeah.
sex acts,
Or
Yeah,
even
you'd be
just
arrested.
regular, like give a kid the joy of sex. That would be really,
Yes.
well, I mean, but it's I can only imagine how this is changing people when the first exposure to sex and sexuality is coming at a really young age and such a graphic and um just a not an organic form. This isn't like you slowly start to hear whispers from the older kids, or maybe mom or dad sits you down and has a talk with you, and then you start to develop your own curiosity and start to experiment with relationships and romance. It's such a departure from that kind of model to have kids sitting alone or in small groups of children and sharing this wildly graphic content and learning about sex through that kind of
Yes.
bombardment of imagery. I just you end up with what is this generation of kids that have been basically molested and abused through
That is a
the yeah.
sadly but an accurate way to look at it. In other words, if you think about, working with clients that have been directly physically molested or raped,
Mhm.
especially as a child, how challenging and, damaging that is and how challenging that is to heal from. But now you have uh, a, a huge chunk, more than half the population bathed in this uh, pornography that is so destructive, not only for the to the males, but obviously to the females, to the relate to marriage. Um, and then recently with AI on top of it,
Oh
I've
gosh.
seen it even expand to the point where, and coinciding with what we were talking about earlier, if men and women have really lost each other. They've lost themselves, their identity. They've lost each other, how to have a relationship because they're messed up to begin with. And they're looking at the opposite sex who's also messed up. And so you have all these people that are just throwing in the towel. And so they're deciding it at a very much earlier age that, I'm going to have to go this alone. And with guys, um, they not only have, if you think about the damage of, looking at all these, unlimited pictures of women with almost perfect bodies. Well, now we do have perfect bodies, through
Mhm.
AI,
Mhm.
and we can create, and you've probably seen some ads where men can create their fantasy, whereas where they were
Mm.
looking for it, and trying to find it in different
Mm.
pictures, now they can design it. And to think about if they begin to entertain, well, maybe I want to have a relationship with an actual live person, and then they see this woman who's angry, bitter, mad, and blames them for everything. There's going to be a great increase beyond what it is now in terms of people
Mhm.
living in isolation
Mhm.
and
Well,
angry and bitter.
yeah, and when you said that, like that phrase, I keep hearing that we're gonna go it alone, we're gonna go our own way. I keep thinking, I don't think that you really are. I think you've just given up on the human side of sex. You're still engaging in
They're
the imaginatory and hedonistic uh,
they're
forms. I
yeah,
mean,
they're
you're
trying,
still
but they're on the wrong road.
mhm,
In other words, they're on a dead end road that is just going to lead to pain and suffering. They're not being told that.
mhm,
They're being told this is the way to go. The more narcissistic you can be, and that's a big one too when you think about the difference between when I first started practicing, there was a large percentage of clients, if this is going to make you laugh, that were suffering from guilt, that they were doing the wrong thing. And
mhm.
that's gone. I haven't had a client complain about that in a long time, but
Really,
now
yeah.
it's narcissistic entitlement,
Mm,
hedonistic, uh, avoid everything that creates pain, even if it makes me a better person or creates resilience. Got to avoid that. And then just go just towards things that create that dopamine hit.
Yeah,
And
that make me feel good.
yes,
Mm,
and so that's which is a road to disaster. There's no upside.
mhm.
There cannot be, even though they have the best of intentions. Um, and so the addictions as well has gone up because it's hard. It's naturally hard for human beings to attempt to adapt to loneliness and being detached from human beings and not that feeling of not being known by anybody. It's really hard for me to even begin to empathize with that.
Mm.
That would feel like.
You know, when I think about the sex positive culture with so much porn, I mean, porn being like in some estimates 30 to 40% of internet content and searches. It's this massive, massive
Yes.
sea of kind of semi-secretive indulgence. And all of the stats on how many young women are now producing their own porn through OnlyFans and this kind of stuff, and how
Yes.
many people, mostly men, but lots of women too, who are addicted to pornography and use it really regularly. It really feels like it's an exploitation of male sexuality and female sexuality that's occurring right now. And I wonder, do you see any room for pornography in a healthy relationship?
No. Never have. Of course, nowadays, because it gets back to that. Even though it's been the word's been stigmatized as perverted. In other words, it's
Hmm.
perverted from, if what you want is the highest ideal to reach the highest level of love and connectedness and understanding and vulnerability, pornography is not that. In other words, it's going to head you off into a different direction, or any type of kink fetish or whatever. It's no longer about those two people. It's about something else it needs to be included. Um, and of course, that generally was not the purview of female sexuality. That's, men. That's why, most sex offenders that are arrested are still men, because they are our sexual development is so on such a different track than women's.
Hmm.
And women, ideally, in a healthy culture, were learned to respect themselves and value what great value they had in their bodies, and um, that 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 created. I mean, if you think about historically, their being able to even if just out of survival and evolutionary reasons, that helped create civilizations and help civilize men, because the fact that our culture has attacked men and women, uh, if most women today, if they have the fleeting thought of what it might be like being with a real man, a good man, that doesn't last long, because that would require something of themselves
Hmm.
that they don't have at the moment. So it would create fear, which is why I remember way back when I first started working and working with people dating, and a woman would go out on a date, come back, and she'd be talking about him. Well, yeah, he was pretty good looking, and he was really nice and very pleasant and polite, and um, but no fireworks.
Hmm.
I don't think I want to see him anymore. And I'd be scratching my head thinking, well, wait a minute, isn't that what you were looking for?
Hmm.
Well, yeah, but there was something missing, and then they would say something vague like a mystery or something.
Hmm.
And of course, sadly, these were women that oftentimes had a track record of, dating the bad boys,
Hmm.
and then wondering, why they can't find a good man. And so but now today it's people are really lost in the dating realm. There's no more courtship. There's no they they're not on the same path of, okay, we're going to date each other because we're both looking at this target, this goal, and we both want the same thing. Uh, we both want uh, honesty, transparency, understanding, love, trust, stability, things that you would think most people ideally would want in the end in a relationship, but what they're doing is working exactly the opposite of all of that.
Hmm.
And of course, it destines them to um, pretty quick misery in a relationship.
You know, even if we, even if as a culture we were to say that we value these things for our kids and start removing some of the comprehensive sex ed and some of the sexual advertising that is done so heavily to children and protect kids from porn and try to encourage the sort of ideal that you talked about, that template of the ideal couple, ideal relationship, which, that's probably some distance off for the culture at large. Maybe some families are beginning to prioritize that and help their kids to be brought up in that way, which is great. But even if we were to make that better for our kids for the next generation, one of the things that I like about the title of your book is that you use the word restore, which is, it implies the rebuilding of something that's been lost. And
Yes.
so it acknowledges the fact that right now, for a lot of people in this culture, that's not a reality. The healthy marriage and family, you've got a lot of people who have been hurt by estrangements, relationship failures, failure to connect, divorce, betrayals, and have a history of a lot of maybe pornography use or high body count. So you've got all of those things that are realities for people, and yet there's hope for restoration. So what does
Yes.
that look like, and how do people, what's your vision for maybe the individual, and even zooming out, how do we get back to something that prioritizes that even if we've been off track?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. I say oftentimes to clients, no matter how long you've gone down the wrong road, you can always stop and turn around. You're never going to make the right road out of the wrong one. In other words, the wrong path. And so you're going to constantly see the signposts saying that, I don't like this, I don't recognize where I am, I'm lost, all those things. And so, but there has to be a goal. We can't, you know, I would say the average client coming in, no matter what they're, whether it's a couple, individual, family, they, much like the medical community, they don't know what their goal is or trajectory. They just know they hate the way they feel. They're in pain and they want the pain to go away. And so part of the therapy that kind of goes into counseling too is to help educate or encourage them that uh, okay, yes, I can help you with the pain, but one of the things that's going to keep the pain away or from you going back is let's find a new goal or target that, yes, there's no quick fix. Absolutely. We've got at least a couple generations that it's going to take a lifetime of repair to get them back to a strong state of health, let's say. But just like with the individual client, you can at least be assured or trust that have the right trajectory. You can it's kind of fuzzy, but I can see the way ahead and I'm on a different road, which always feels uncomfortable because like any change, it's going to be unfamiliar. But if you can believe that and have enough faith that okay, this is the design and I can look at the data and the book is written in a way sort of like a manual that this is this is the way it works. This is the way it worked. And here's the data that shows back in the 50s and early 60s, yeah, they had it down. And all the indicators showed that. And all the indicators have dropped for all the cultural reasons that we can learn about historically. But it's, that's a lot of what I do in my practice is not see the client all the way to the end goal, but get them set on the trajectory. Here's the map. Here's where you are. Here's where you've been, and here's where you're going.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and once they establish that and start developing habits and belief systems and behaviors that are moral in a sense that they're life-giving, that they're healthy, then they're going to be okay. You know,
Hmm.
uh, some will never reach the promised land, but at least they're going to be on the way,
Hmm.
and they're not going to be living in misery or complete lack of hope that, I'm just lost, floundering here, and then at some point I'm going to die, and that's it.
Hmm.
Which is back, one of the last chapters in the book or the last chapter is on retirement years, the golden years.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, that I'm seeing so many couples and individuals that have been on the wrong road their entire life, and so they're just now getting off that road, but at least there's hope. I have this, and in fact, I have the quote in my book, this plaque on my wall. It says that nobody can go back to start a new beginning, but anyone can start today and make a new ending.
Hmm.
And so that's a philosophy that a lot of what I work with a lot of clients and marriages that some people would love to with their fantasy just start over, but of course we can't do that.
Hmm.
We can switch roads though,
Hmm.
uh,
I
and
I
it's
love that.
and it's not like I'm reinventing the wheel here or anything. I didn't make any of this stuff up. I mean, there's all kinds of history and data that shows this is how we can really achieve true fulfillment and happiness in life.
Hmm.
And we're just sadly at a point in our history where we know how to really mess it up.
Hmm.
And I'm really hoping that we can turn that around.
It reminds me of a saying that I like, and I don't know who to whom to attribute it. I don't have a reference, but it's the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago, and the second best time is today.
That's true. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I like that one a lot.
Uh-huh.
Um, I feel like I could keep on talking with you for a long time and explore these topics so much further, but I want to be respectful of your time and thank you for joining me today. It's just been
But yeah, boy, time has flown.
fantastic.
I hope that's a
Yeah,
good sign.
I think so. I think that it's I hope that I hope that this will be a meaningful discussion for people out there and that a lot of people will read your book because I
Yeah,
think the work
I
is very valuable.
I do believe it could help act as a manual and a guide and roadmap as to help people move out of whatever wrong road they're on.
Hmm. And going back to one thing you said, I just kind of want to underscore it because I thought it was really great, was about focusing less on finding the right person and more on being the right person.
Yes, that's the only thing we have control over.
Hmm.
Otherwise, yeah, I always remember the first time I heard someone say, "Yeah, I'm going to move to Oregon next month," and I go, What's you got a job thing?" No, I think I'm done dating Los Angeles or Southern California men, so I think I'll find someone up there or have a better chance.
Hmm.
Uh,
Well, yeah, that's interesting. Oh, so much to think about. Thank you so much for joining me today, Rick. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you too, Leslie. I'm honored and very grateful. to do
Could
this.
can you tell people just out loud your website and where they can find you online, and just remind people the name of your book and where to find it?
Yes, the book again is Marriage and Families: A Guide and Tools in Order to Form a More Perfect Union, and you probably know where that came from.
Hmm.
And so it you can find it on Amazon, and my website is uh, Rick McCarthy MFT.com.
Excellent. Well, I'll put links in the description of this video, and thank you again for your time today.
Leslie, thank you too.